You are our strong workhorse. Leave the real finances to your brother. I am Bailey Hayes, a 28-year-old soil hydrologist and fertilizer hauler. For 5 grueling years, I hauled 10,000 50-pound bags of ammonium nitrate across scorched fields to save our supposedly bankrupt family farm. Meanwhile, my parents secretly leased my inherited groundwater rights for millions to fund my brother Tyler's luxury real estate firm. Survival builds character. You should be proud, my mother sneered, patting my soil-stained hand. Instead of screaming or begging for explanations, my fingers grazed the cheap plastic trophy they gave me for my 18th birthday, and I picked up the forged land deeds. At the Fresno County Agriculture hearing, I filed an emergency injunction that permanently froze their assets and bankrupted Tyler's company in front of 50 local officials. Let me show you how the well ran dry. The silent pain of being exploited by your own family is suffocating. Tell me where you are listening from and your local time in the comments, because I read every single one. Now, let us go back to the exact Tuesday morning when the manipulation began to unravel. For 5 long years, my routine never changed. Every morning at dawn, before the California sun could bake the valley floor, I drove a rusted Ford pickup into the south fields, hauling heavy bags of agricultural fertilizer until my shoulders bled through my canvas work shirt. I was 23 when my father told me the farm was drowning in insurmountable debt. He sat me down at the kitchen table, his face drawn and serious, and explained that every dollar I saved the family on manual labor kept a roof over our heads. He insisted this sacrifice was necessary to allow my older brother Tyler to pursue his commercial real estate ambitions in the city. I believed him completely. I embraced the exhaustion. On the dust-covered bookshelf above the desk in the barn office sat a cheap plastic trophy they bought me for my 18th birthday. The faded gold lettering across the base read Employee of the Month. I kept that peeling piece of plastic prominently displayed as tangible proof that my endless exhaustion actually meant something to the people who raised me. On a humid Tuesday afternoon, I walked into the main house office to hand over a stack of diesel fuel receipts. My father Alan sat behind his massive mahogany desk, a heavy iron safe resting wide open on the hardwood floor directly behind his leather chair. I set the receipts on the blotter, my hands still chalky with white fertilizer dust. As he reached for his coffee mug, his elbow knocked a thick manila folder off the edge of the desk. Loose papers scattered across the floor, settling directly at the toes of my heavy work boots. I bent down to gather them, my eyes locking onto an official tax assessment form issued by the Fresno County Water District. 5 years of rigorous, specialized hydrology training instantly clicked into place inside my brain. My eyes scanned the column labeled Annual Subsurface Extraction Volume. The document listed a continuous outflow of 42 million gallons of groundwater for the current fiscal year. Yet, for 3 consecutive growing seasons, my father had claimed total crop failure due to severe drought, forcing me to work 2 exhausting manual jobs without a single dime of pay just to keep the farm afloat. Before my mind could fully process the massive numerical discrepancy, my father lunged forward across the desk. He snatched the paper from my fingers with a sharp, violent tug, tearing the top corner in his haste. He barked a warning, his voice laced with a sudden, uncharacteristic panic. He shoved the documents back into the iron safe and slammed the heavy door shut, spinning the combination dial with 3 aggressive mechanical clicks. He stood up, towering over me, wiping a bead of sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief. He told me that despite my college degree, I knew absolutely nothing about real business. He warned me that believing I was smarter than my brother would not pay our land taxes, and he ordered me back out to the flatbed truck, reminding me that the fertilizer sacks would not move themselves. I kept my head down, stepped out onto the porch and pulled my heavy leather work gloves back on. But as the scorching valley sun hit my face, the numbers stayed burned into my mind like white fire. An agricultural operation on the brink of bankruptcy does not extract 42 million gallons of water a year. 2 days after the incident in the office, an old black Buick pulled up beside the rural gas station where I was scrubbing the corrosive fertilizer dust from my forearms. Out stepped Edward Mercer, my late grandmother's retired estate attorney. He looked significantly older than the last time I saw him, his wool coat fraying at the collar, but his hands were perfectly steady as he handed me a sealed, heavy manila envelope. He spoke softly, his eyes fixed on the rusted bed of my work truck, telling me that my grandmother Eleanor had trusted him with this document 6 years ago. He said she knew exactly how my parents operated, and he instructed me to read the second paragraph on the 4th page. I opened the envelope under the flickering fluorescent light of the truck cab. The document was a certified probate deed dated 6 years prior. There was absolutely no ambiguity in the dense legal text. My grandmother had legally severed Parcel 4B, the 70-acre basin containing the farm's deepest and most robust natural aquifer from the main estate, bequeathing it solely and directly to me. It was not shared family property. It was not my father's corporate asset. It belonged entirely to me. A quiet, cold stillness settled over my chest. The farm was never bankrupt. My family had not been struggling to survive a drought. They had been sitting on a liquid gold mine while letting me break my back in the dirt for 5 years. That night, I sat at my small kitchen table and booted up my laptop. I opened the California Department of Water Resources mapping portal, logging in with my professional hydrologist credentials. I meticulously overlaid the parcel boundary maps with satellite thermal imagery and flow meter sensor data across the entire county. My fingers moved over the keyboard with mechanical, practiced precision. I ran a cross-analysis between my specific parcel and the municipal utility drawdowns. 3 massive, high-capacity industrial wells flashed red on my screen, sitting directly on the exact coordinates of my inherited land. The extraction telemetry logged continuous heavy pumping at 800 gallons per minute. At the current agricultural drought, spot market rates, that volume of water was worth $600,000 a year. Over the last 5 years, someone had harvested $3 million from the deep soil right under my feet. The sheer scale of the theft hit me like a physical blow in the ribs. I reached for my notebook and wrote down the 3 alphanumeric well permit numbers. My parents had systematically stolen millions from my inheritance, feeding it directly into my brother Tyler's failing real estate ventures, while handing me a $10 plastic trophy in exchange for my youth. I navigated to the Fresno County Recorder Public Access Database to pull the original lease authorization documents. I needed to see the signatures with my own eyes. I input my hydrologist license token and clicked the request box. An amber warning banner flashed across the screen indicating that certified lease records required Tier 2 manual clerk authorization, carrying a mandatory processing time of 48 hours and a non-refundable expedited processing fee of $350. I opened my wallet. Inside lay 3 crumpled 50s and a $20 bill, representing my entire earnings for 60 hours of brutal manual labor that week. My knuckles turned white against the worn leather. I pulled out my credit card, entered the 16 numbers, and clicked confirm payment, watching my bank account balance drop instantly below zero. The screen blinked once, displaying a green confirmation notice scheduling the file release for Thursday at 9 o'clock in the morning. I closed the laptop screen slowly. The quiet in my kitchen was no longer suffocating. It was cold, sharp, and intensely patient. At precisely 9 o'clock on Thursday morning, my cell phone chimed with an automated notification from the county clerk's portal. I opened the encrypted attachment on my laptop while sitting in the cab of my pickup behind the fertilizer shed. The file contained 24 pages of heavy legal text titled Subsurface Water Extraction Lease and Easement Agreement. I scrolled past the environmental impact statements and the zoning citations until my eyes locked onto page 19, the notary signature block. There was my name, typed cleanly in bold font, listing me as the sole owner and grantor. Directly above it lay the blue ink signature. It was a fluid, sweeping script with a highly distinctive, exaggerated loop on the capital letter. My breath caught sharply in my throat. I do not write in cursive. Years of drafting technical hydrology blueprints trained me to print every single letter in rigid square block capitals. That swooping, elegant loop belonged to exactly one person. Every birthday card, every medical consent form, and every school permission slip from my childhood carried that exact same elegant flourish. My mother, Suzanne Hayes, had taken a blue ballpoint pen to an official legal affidavit, forged my signature, and leased away my liquid inheritance without blinking an eye. A cold, heavy nausea settled in the pit of my stomach. It was one thing to suspect financial favoritism or emotional neglect. It was entirely another to hold physical, irrefutable proof that the woman who gave birth to me had calculatedly erased my legal existence for cash. For years, I had swallowed my pride, believing I just wasn't as smart or as business savvy as Tyler. I endured the back-breaking labor, comforting myself with the thought that my silent sacrifices were keeping our family from absolute ruin. Deep down, the bitter truth was now staring at me from an illuminated laptop screen. I was never a beloved daughter to them. I was an unpaid, disposable servant whose youth they liquidated to build a lavish pedestal for their golden boy. I scrolled down to Exhibit C, the payment routing schedule. Over 60 consecutive months, $50,000 a month had been dispersed from the Municipal Water Utility Trust. The receiving account was not the farm's operating line. It was a private escrow account at First Pacific Bank registered to Hayes Capital Development Corporation, my brother's commercial real estate firm. Every single gallon of my groundwater had been converted into cash to pay for his glass tower office lease in downtown Fresno, his tailored Italian suits, and his lavish client dinners, all while I hauled 60-pound fertilizer, sacks until my palms bled. A loud, obnoxious exhaust note rattled the corrugated tin roof of the fertilizer shed. I closed my laptop, slid the printed lease agreement inside my leather clipboard, and stepped out into the blinding sunlight. A gleaming, metallic gray Porsche sports car was idling loudly in the gravel driveway. My brother Tyler stepped out, adjusting his designer sunglasses and brushing an invisible speck of dust off his crisp linen shirt. My mother rushed out from the front porch, her arms wide open, a beaming, radiant smile on her face that she had never once offered me in my entire life. She gushed over her successful boy, pressing her cheek against his while he handed her a dry cleaning bag filled with custom suits. Tyler boasted loudly enough to carry across the dirt lot, telling her to inform our father that the escrow on the massive Grand Avenue commercial project would open the following week. He stated that he just needed the county board to approve the expanded utility easement on Friday morning. Once that deal cleared, he promised to buy them a $4 million oceanfront villa in Monterey, swearing they would never have to look at this dirty, worthless farm again, and that he would take care of them for the rest of their lives. Suzanne wiped a tear of pure joy from her eye, gazing at him like he was a divine savior who had descended to rescue her. She did not even notice me standing 20 feet away, my work boots caked in manure and my canvas shirt soaked in sweat. She had never looked at me with that kind of reverence. Not when I graduated at the absolute top of my class in soil science, and certainly not when I worked 80 hours a week through the scorching summer heat to save her home. To her, I was just the reliable workhorse destined to stay permanently in the mud. I tightened my grip on the leather clipboard resting against my ribs. Inside lay the certified proof that the expanded utility easement Tyler needed on Friday was built entirely on a criminal forgery of my private property. He did not own the water. My parents did not own the land. Their entire $4 million real estate empire was resting on a fragile house of cards, and I was holding the match. I turned and walked quietly back toward the main house without uttering a single word. I simply waited for dinner when all three of them would be sitting at the same mahogany table, celebrating a fortune stolen directly from my youth. The dining room table was set with fine porcelain plates and crystal glasses, a stark and deliberate contrast to the dried dirt covering my work boots. Tyler was carving a thick prime rib roast, boasting endlessly about his firm's aggressive expansion into 3 new commercial districts. Suzanne beamed at him, pouring expensive silver label wine, while Alan laughed heartily at every arrogant joke Tyler uttered. I sat at the far end of the long mahogany table, my hands resting over the black leather folder in my lap. For 28 years, I had occupied this exact seat, quietly absorbing their subtle rejections and genuinely believing my purpose was to sacrifice myself for their grand ambitions. Tonight, the silence in my chest was cold, sharp, and primed to rupture. When Suzanne reached across the table to pass Tyler another serving of meat, I reached into my folder. Without raising my voice or displaying a single ounce of hesitation, I slid 3 printed documents across the polished wood, placing them directly beside my father's wine glass. Page 19 faced upward, highlighting the forged signature in bright yellow marker. Beside it lay the routing schedule, detailing 60 consecutive months of wire transfers, totaling $3 million straight into Hayes Capital Development Corporation. Alan stopped laughing mid-sentence. His eyes dropped to the paper, scanning the blue ink loop of Suzanne's handwriting and the red embossed seal of the Fresno County Recorder. The cheerful clinking of silverware vanished, instantly replaced by the low mechanical hum of the kitchen refrigerator. I stated the exact figure of $50,000 a month, keeping my voice perfectly steady, measured, and devoid of any emotional tremor. I told them that was the exact value of the groundwater extracted from my parcel, while they looked me in the eye and told me the farm was broke. I looked directly at my mother and told her she had forged my signature, stealing my grandmother's inheritance to fund Tyler's office lease. Suzanne did not flinch. She did not gasp in horror, nor did she reach out to touch my hand with any semblance of maternal remorse. She simply set her silver fork down, took a slow, deliberate sip of her wine, and looked at me with cold, entirely detached eyes. The affectionate warmth she had showered on Tyler just moments ago vanished, entirely replaced by the calculating glare of a predator fiercely protecting its territory. Alan did not panic either. He leaned back in his heavy leather chair, folded his hands over his stomach, and looked at me as if I were merely an unruly farmhand who desperately needed discipline. He asked me if I thought I was clever, his voice dropping to an icy whisper. He reached into his breast pocket, pulled out a small black index card, and read aloud with terrifying precision. He recited my exact state license number as a California certified professional hydrologist. He set the card down directly on top of my forged lease. He asked me if I knew how fragile a professional license truly was, and what would happen to a young aspiring scientist when 3 highly respected local farm owners submitted sworn notarized affidavits accusing her of falsifying soil, contamination reports. Suzanne leaned forward, her elbows pressing into the white tablecloth, the diamonds on her fingers catching the light of the chandelier. She reminded me that the 5 members of the Fresno County Agriculture Commission were personal friends of my father, noting that the lead commissioner played golf with him every single Saturday. Her voice grew sharp as razor wire as she promised that if I stepped into that public hearing the next morning and mentioned the word forgery, they would turn me into a disgraced fraud before I even reached the podium. She vowed to strip my license, blackball me from every environmental firm in the state, and ensure I spent the rest of my life hauling fertilizer sacks for minimum wage because nobody else would ever hire me. Tyler leaned back, taking a slow sip of wine, a deeply arrogant smirk playing on his lips. He dismissively told me to leave the real business to people who actually knew how to build something and instructed me to go wash the dirt off my hands. I did not throw my glass against the wall, and I did not shed a single tear of defeat. I reached out, picked up my black leather folder, and pulled my documents back off the table, sliding them neatly inside. I looked past my mother's cold gaze out into the hallway where the cheap plastic trophy sat on the dust-covered bookshelf. The gold paint was peeling off the plastic base, exposing the dull gray resin beneath. I stood up, smoothed down the front of my canvas work trousers, and looked my parents dead in the eye. I quietly reminded them that the commission voted on Tyler's easement at 10 o'clock the next morning. I turned and walked out the front door into the cool valley air. They truly believed they held my entire career and future in the palms of their hands. They had absolutely no idea I had already filed the court documents that would permanently freeze theirs. At precisely 10 o'clock on Friday morning, the main hearing room of the Fresno County Agriculture Commission was packed to absolute capacity. 50 local farm owners, county officials, and regional developers filled the heavy oak pews. In the front row sat my parents dressed in tailored Navy suits, nodding pleasantly and shaking hands with Commissioner Vance. At the center podium stood my brother Tyler, clicking a gold pen, ready to execute the permanent transfer of the water rights. Commissioner Vance tapped his wooden gavel and announced the petition for the long-term commercial groundwater easement by Hayes Capital Development Corporation. He formally asked if there were any public comments before proceeding to a binding board vote. Tyler stepped closer to the microphone, a deeply smug smile resting on his face. He thanked the commissioner loudly, proclaiming that his family had managed this land for decades and that they were fully prepared to move forward with this historic agreement. I stated my objection loudly and clearly from the back of the room. The chamber fell dead silent. I stepped down the center aisle wearing a clean, perfectly ironed blouse, my hair pulled back tightly, holding a thick manila folder. I walked straight to the public podium, stepped up to the microphone, and looked Commissioner Vance directly in the eyes. I stated my name, my credentials as a certified soil hydrologist, and my status as the sole legal owner of the parcel in question. I informed the board that they were about to vote on a stolen asset. Suzanne snapped her head toward me, her eyes flaring with absolute unmasked rage. Alan half stood from his pew, opening his mouth to call for the security guards, but before he could utter a single word, Edward Mercer stepped into the gallery. The veteran attorney walked directly to the front and handed 3 certified court-stamped documents to the armed court bailiff, who immediately brought them to Commissioner Vance. I continued speaking calmly into the microphone, my words amplified through the room's surround sound speakers. I announced that at 9:15 that morning, a judge of the Fresno County Superior Court had issued an emergency injunction. All groundwater transfers on the parcel were frozen indefinitely, and a massive forensic audit had been formally ordered into Hayes Capital Development Corporation for criminal fraud and signature forgery. Commissioner Vance adjusted his reading glasses, his face turning entirely pale as he scanned the judge's signature and the raised, undeniable seal of the court. He struck his gavel down hard against the wood. He declared the hearing adjourned and announced that all commercial accounts affiliated with the permit were frozen by direct order of the court. A sharp collective gasp echoed through the gallery. 50 pairs of eyes turned instantly and unforgivingly toward my family. The collapse was immediate, physical, and entirely visible. My father stood up abruptly to challenge the clerk, but his hands trembled so violently that his heavy leather binder slipped entirely from his grip. It hit the hard tile floor with a loud, echoing slap, scattering sensitive financial papers across the center aisle. He reached blindly for his desktop microphone in a panic, knocking the metal arm sideways. A high-pitched, deafening screech echoed through the speakers, making half the room wince and cover their ears. Beside him, my mother's face drained of every single drop of color. Her hands flew to her throat in sheer horror, clutching her expensive pearl necklace so tightly that the string snapped, spilling dozens of white beads that bounced and rolled across the oak floor. Tyler tried to rise from his chair to reach the podium and defend his empire, but his knees buckled underneath his tailored suit. He collapsed heavily back into his seat, his mouth opening and closing in rapid succession like a fish pulled from the water. He tried to speak to the powerful commissioners staring down at him in disgust, but absolutely no sound came out. He had lost his voice entirely. I simply gathered my folder, turned my back on the 50 whispering officials, and walked out of the chamber into the clean, bright morning light. The financial collapse of my family unfolded with terrifying mathematical speed. Within 21 days of the court injunction, First Pacific Bank called in every single outstanding loan tied to Hayes Capital Development Corporation. Without the $50,000 of monthly groundwater revenue insulating his ledger, my brother Tyler's commercial empire disintegrated like wet paper in a storm. The grand lease on his downtown Fresno tower defaulted. Subcontractor liens flooded his corporate mailbox, and his metallic gray Porsche was repossessed directly from his driveway on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. On the 4th week, I returned to the main farmhouse, accompanied by a Fresno County deputy sheriff, to formally serve the final receiver notices. The grand mahogany front door stood completely unlocked, swinging slightly in the autumn breeze. Inside, the quiet was heavy, hollow, and suffocating. I walked down the hallway toward my father's office. The heavy iron safe in the corner sat wide open, its thick steel door swinging uselessly on its hinges. Every manila file, every savings ledger, and every emergency cashier's check had been completely cleared out. My parents were sitting in the dimly lit living room among unwashed coffee mugs and unopened foreclosure notices. Suzanne sat on the rug beside the cold fireplace, her manicured nails chipped and broken, clutching a dead cell phone in her trembling hand. When the bank freeze hit, she and Alan had scraped together their absolutely final remaining liquid personal assets, $90,000 in emergency funds, and handed them blindly to Tyler, genuinely believing their golden boy would settle the angry creditors and save the family name. Instead, Tyler had booked a one-way ticket to Miami, emptied the remaining joint accounts, and vanished into thin air. He did not leave a note. He did not leave a forwarding address. The cherished son, who had proudly promised them a $4 million oceanfront villa in Monterey, had stripped them of their absolute last dollar and left them to face the federal auditors entirely alone. Suzanne slowly lifted her head, her eyes hollow, sunken, and bloodshot. She looked at my ironed blouse and my leather clipboard, then down at her own empty hands. Her voice rasped like dry paper as she whispered that Tyler had taken everything. She confessed that her favorite son had taken every single dime and blocked their numbers. There was absolutely no apology in her voice. There was no sudden awakening of maternal regret, nor any acknowledgement of the 5 brutal years they had spent bleeding my youth dry to build his fraudulent throne. She was not crying because she had wronged me. She was crying because the predator she raised had finally turned his fangs on her. I set the certified receiver papers cleanly on the edge of the glass coffee table. I informed them softly, my voice devoid of both anger and warmth, that the bank was taking formal possession of the house and the land on the 1st of the month, and that they had exactly 10 days to pack their personal belongings. I turned and walked back out to the porch without looking back once. The safe was empty, their golden boy was gone, and the catastrophic bill for 5 years of unholy favoritism had finally come due. I walked out of the silent farmhouse and stepped onto the gravel driveway. Before reaching my truck, I made a final deliberate turn toward the weathered fertilizer barn. I opened the screen door, stepped inside the dim, dusty office, and stood before the wooden bookshelf. There sat the cheap plastic trophy they had given me on my 18th birthday. The fake gold paint was almost entirely peeled away, exposing the brittle, worthless gray resin underneath. For 10 years, I had kept this $10 piece of plastic on display. I had worn my calluses like medals, genuinely believing that my endless endurance made me worthy of their love. I reached out my fingers, wrapping around the lightweight plastic stem, and pulled it off the shelf. The court had officially given me back my grandmother's water rights. The bank had seized their house, and the receiver had frozen their accounts. But as I stood in the quiet dust of the barn, looking down at my scarred palms, I knew the bitter, undeniable truth. No legal injunction could ever restore 5 years of stolen youth. No judge could magically return the thousands of hours I spent breaking my back in the blistering sun while they laughed in their air-conditioned dining room. The youth I sacrificed for a lie was gone forever, and the grief of realizing you were never truly loved by your own parents is a wound that no amount of financial restitution can fully erase. Walking away from that barn, I understood the insidious nature of toxic family dynamics and the dangerous way abusers package their exploitation as character building. I realized that my own silence had been the safest weapon they used against me. I walked out into the bright afternoon sun and stopped beside a heavy steel burn drum at the edge of the field. I held the plastic trophy over the opening, opened my hand, and let it drop. It hit the rusted iron bottom with a sharp, hollow thud. I did not bend down to look inside. I did not blink, nor did I reach up to wipe away the sweat trickling down my neck. I stepped into my truck, pulled the heavy door shut, and turned the ignition key. The engine roared to life. I pulled onto the county road without looking at the rearview mirror once. The air in the cabin was cool, clean, and entirely mine, bringing with it a profound, unshakable clarity. Never accept a badge of honor for your suffering if the person pinning it to your chest is the one who pushed you into the fire. Blood does not entitle anyone to your future, and loyalty without mutual respect is nothing more than a hostage situation. Survival is a badge of honor only until you realize the people praising your strength were the ones holding your head underwater.